The Galactic Empire's cruiser loomed against the endless stars, a hulking shadow of authority. Its metal hull glinted faintly as smaller patrol ships swarmed like wasps around a hive. Within one such patrol vessel, Marcus Kane sat shackled in a cold, dimly lit cell. The human's expression betrayed nothing, his chiseled features unreadable beneath a tangle of unkempt hair. To his captors, he appeared to be just another deserter, a coward fleeing the aftermath of humanity's failed rebellion. "Keep your eyes forward," barked one of the guards, a hulking alien with bluish skin and 4 glimmering eyes that darted suspiciously. Marcus obeyed, wordlessly staring at the metal floor. His silence only fueled the guard's irritation, but Marcus remained calm, calculating. The weight of his restraints pressed against his wrists, a stark reminder of the Empire's iron grip on anyone deemed a threat. "Humans," the guard muttered to his colleague, a wiry figure with scales shimmering under the harsh artificial light. "Always scurrying like vermin when the Empire tightens its leash. They're barely worth the trouble," the second alien replied, sneering. "But protocol says every suspected deserter gets processed. Can't let them breed rebellion, no matter how pathetic." Marcus listened to the exchange, his head tilted just slightly. He had no intention of correcting their assumptions, no desire to reveal the truth, that he was far from the helpless soldier they believed him to be. Every insult, every dismissal, was another layer of camouflage. The ship's engines hummed as it docked with the cruiser. The cell door hissed open, and Marcus was yanked to his feet. The guards flanked him, their weapons ready, as they escorted him through sterile, labyrinthine corridors. The cruiser reeked of oil and authority, its cold design an extension of the Empire's soulless bureaucracy. "Name," demanded a third guard as they reached the processing chamber, his voice clipped and impatient. "Marcus Kane," he replied, his voice low but steady. "And rank?" "Private," Marcus lied without hesitation. His gaze was steady, almost disarmingly calm, as if he had nothing to lose. The guard's suspicion flickered briefly before being smothered by his own arrogance. The chamber was stark, dominated by a towering control console and a glowing force field that separated detainees from their captors. Marcus stood motionless as the guard keyed in his supposed identity. "Another nobody," the guard scoffed after a moment, waving dismissively. "You'll rot in Block 12 until command decides what to do with you. Move along." Marcus was shoved forward, his chains clanking with each step. Inside, he took note of every detail: the number of guards, the placement of surveillance cameras, and the visible weaknesses in their formation. His soldiers' training merged seamlessly with the instincts of a predator, his mind already cataloging options. The detention block was a grim warren of cells stacked like tombs. The faint hum of energy barriers and the occasional outburst from other prisoners filled the air. Marcus was thrust into a cell at the far end of the block. The door sealed shut with an ominous clang. Alone at last, Marcus sat on the narrow cot and exhaled slowly. His hands rested on his knees, the restraints still biting into his skin. He could feel the guards watching him from behind the shimmering energy barrier, but he didn't look up. Instead, he closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of his breathing steady his thoughts. This was a familiar situation: captivity, confinement. It was not the first time he had been underestimated, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. What the Empire didn't realize was that they hadn't captured a deserter. They had caught something far more dangerous: a weapon sharpened by betrayal, rage, and years of blood-soaked survival. Hours passed. The artificial lights dimmed slightly, signaling the ship's night cycle. Marcus shifted, leaning back against the cold wall. His expression remained unreadable, but beneath the surface, a storm brewed. The Empire's arrogance was its greatest weakness, and Marcus intended to exploit it. For now, he waited, biding his time. Every second in this cell was another step closer to freedom and retribution. He knew the guards would let their guard down. They always did. The faint sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor, fading into silence. Marcus opened his eyes, his piercing gaze focused and unrelenting. The Empire thought it had captured prey. It had no idea it had caged a predator. And predators, Marcus thought, never stay caged for long. The lights flickered faintly, casting distorted shadows across the walls of his cell. Marcus leaned forward, his chains scraping softly against the cot. He smirked, a chilling promise etched into the curve of his lips. Marcus Kane leaned against the cold, metallic wall of his cell, his eyes half closed but his mind far from idle. The sterile hum of the cruiser faded into the background as fragments of his past seeped into his consciousness, vivid and unrelenting. This wasn't the first time he'd been confined, though this cell was far more luxurious than some of the places he'd endured. Years ago, Marcus had been a soldier, a disciplined, idealistic man who believed in duty and the value of loyalty. Back then, he had fought for humanity's survival against the rising dominance of the Galactic Empire. He remembered the rallying cries of his unit, the camaraderie that bound them as they faced insurmountable odds. Yet, even as they fought valiantly, the Empire's grip tightened, crushing resistance with ruthless efficiency. It was on the barren world of Stygos for that Marcus's faith was shattered. The mission had been simple on paper: secure the colony and evacuate its inhabitants before the Empire's fleet arrived. But his superiors had lied. There was no evacuation plan, no reinforcements coming to their aid. The mission was a diversion, a calculated sacrifice to buy time for the fleet elsewhere. Marcus had led his squad into a death trap, unwittingly guiding them to slaughter. The memory of their screams still haunted him, the raw betrayal etched into their faces as the Empire's orbital bombardment rained down. He had barely escaped with his life, crawling out of the wreckage like a ghost. The Empire had taken everything from him: his brothers in arms, his purpose, and his faith in the chain of command. Survival had come at a cost. The man who emerged from the ashes of Stygos IV was no longer the dutiful soldier. He became a shadow, slipping through the cracks of galactic society. Mercenaries, smugglers, and criminals became his allies. Vengeance, his creed. In time, Marcus Kane transformed into something the Empire feared but couldn't name: a ghost that left chaos in his wake. His first contract had been simple: silence a corrupt imperial official extorting a frontier colony. The credits were good, and the target was worse than scum, but it was the thrill of execution that Marcus hadn't anticipated. His training clicked into place like clockwork. Every step of the mission unfolded with ruthless precision: infiltration, elimination, extraction. By the time the Empire's investigators arrived, there was no trace of him except a cold, lifeless corpse. From that point, Marcus's name became a whisper in the criminal underworld. He was no longer just a soldier, he was a hitman, a phantom who specialized in striking where it hurt most. Imperial generals, syndicate overlords, and black market tycoons, none were beyond his reach. His operations were swift and brutal, his motives unreadable. But with every mission, Marcus's reputation grew, and so did the danger. Contracts became bloodier, the stakes higher. Yet, beneath the mask of the ruthless killer, Marcus felt a void deepening. He told himself it was survival, just another way to stay ahead of the Empire that hunted him. But the truth gnawed at him. His life had become a series of calculated moves with no endgame. Now, sitting in the Empire's cell, Marcus felt the weight of his decisions pressing against him. His hands rested on his knees, scarred from years of violence. To the guards, he was just another prisoner. But within him simmered a rage born of betrayal and years of bloodshed. He exhaled slowly, his breaths measured as the flickering lights of the detention block cast shadows across his face. Memories of his most recent contract surfaced: an Imperial lieutenant stationed on a remote outpost. The lieutenant had overseen the slaughter of a civilian colony suspected of harboring insurgents. Marcus had been hired by survivors seeking justice, though they could afford to pay him little. He'd taken the job anyway. It had been quick. An untraceable poison slipped into the officer's drink. When the Empire discovered their man dead, panic spread through the ranks. Marcus had watched from the shadows as they scrambled, their facade of control cracking. For Marcus, it was a small victory, a fleeting reminder that even the mighty Empire could bleed. Now, the hunter had become the hunted. His capture wasn't random, and he knew it. Somewhere in the depths of this cruiser, the Empire's officers were poring over his file, trying to piece together who he truly was. They would see the scattered reports, the rumors of a ghost who left no survivors. But they wouldn't find what mattered most. His purpose. Marcus smirked faintly, his lips curling as he leaned back against the wall. The Empire had made a grave mistake in taking him alive. They thought they'd captured a deserter, a stray human who'd run out of places to hide. What they didn't realize was that Marcus Kane had been waiting for this opportunity. Captivity was a game he had played before, and he knew how it ended. This time, the Empire would learn the true meaning of fear. As the hum of the cruiser's engines vibrated through the cell, Marcus opened his eyes, sharp and focused. The past had shaped him into a weapon, and now the Empire had unknowingly placed that weapon at the heart of its fortress. The storm was coming. Marcus would make sure of it. Marcus Kane lay motionless on the narrow cot, his eyes half closed and his breathing even. To the untrained observer or the guards monitoring the cameras, he appeared to be dozing, beaten into submission by the monotony of captivity. But behind his stillness was a mind working with surgical precision, analyzing, calculating, preparing. For days he had been watching. Every flicker of the lights, every hum of the ship's systems, every barked order from the guards was catalogued and dissected. He had memorized the guard rotations, the intervals between their patrols, the exact moment when the energy barriers of the cells flickered during routine power recalibrations. The cruiser was a fortress, yes, but even the strongest fortresses had cracks. The guards underestimated him. Why wouldn't they? To them, Marcus was just another human, outnumbered, outmatched, and confined. That arrogance was their mistake, and Marcus intended to exploit it. His chance came during the ship's artificial night cycle. The detention block was quieter than usual. The guards relaxed but still vigilant. Marcus waited until one of them passed his cell, a towering brute with leathery skin and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. The guard lingered briefly, checking the energy barrier before continuing down the corridor. Perfect. Marcus sat up slowly, careful not to draw the attention of the cameras. From beneath the thin mattress, he retrieved a small shard of metal, a fragment of the cot frame he'd pried loose days earlier. It wasn't much, but in skilled hands, even a sliver of metal could become a tool. He worked quickly, using the shard to tamper with the locking mechanism of his shackles. The restraints had been designed to suppress brute strength, not precision. After several tense minutes, the cuffs clicked open, falling silently onto the cot. Marcus rubbed his wrists, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. Step 1, complete. The next phase required allies, temporary ones. Marcus hated working with others, but he knew he couldn't take the cruiser alone. 2 cells down from his, a hulking alien prisoner with a cybernetic arm stood pacing. Across the corridor, an emaciated figure with sharp, angular features hunched over, muttering in a language Marcus didn't recognize. They were exactly what he needed. Timing his movements with the patrolling guard's route, Marcus approached the barrier of his cell and tapped lightly on the wall, just enough to catch the attention of the brute. The alien's glowing eyes snapped toward him, suspicion and curiosity warring in his gaze. "You want out of here?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. The alien snorted but didn't reply. Marcus continued, his tone cold and deliberate. "Keep ignoring me, and you'll rot in this cell until the Empire decides you're expendable. Work with me, and I'll get us off this ship." Pause. The alien stepped closer, his massive frame eclipsing the faint glow of the corridor lights. "You've got a plan, human?" "I've got the plan," Marcus said, his eyes locking onto the alien's with unflinching certainty. The alien grunted, considering. Finally, he nodded. "Call me Varek," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "Marcus," he replied, moving on to the next recruit. The angular prisoner across the corridor was trickier. His wiry frame suggested speed over strength, and his fingers, constantly twitching, hinted at some technical proficiency. After a brief exchange, Marcus learned the prisoner was a hacker named Tress, imprisoned for dismantling an Imperial database. With Varek's muscle and Tress's skill set, Marcus had the foundation of his plan. Under the guise of routine movements within their cells, the three began coordinating. Tress hacked the energy barriers, creating a small, temporary disruption that allowed them to slip through. Varek's cybernetic arm was repurposed to disable a patrolling guard with a single, silent blow, and Marcus scavenged the guard's keycard and blaster. The trio moved swiftly through the corridors, avoiding detection as they made their way toward the ship's central systems. Marcus led with confidence, his training kicking in. Every step was calculated, every decision deliberate. But their progress wasn't without setbacks. At one junction, an alarm blared briefly, triggered by a malfunctioning door. The sound echoed ominously, but Tress managed to override the system before it escalated. "Keep moving," Marcus ordered, his voice cold and steady. Finally, they reached their destination, the control room for the ship's detention systems. Inside, two Imperial officers sat at consoles, oblivious to the approaching danger. Marcus didn't hesitate. With lethal precision, he incapacitated the officers, leaving them unconscious on the floor. Tress quickly accessed the system, disabling the remaining barriers and cameras. Varek chuckled darkly, flexing his massive hands. "Not bad, human." Marcus didn't respond, his focus already on the next step. They weren't free yet. The Empire would notice their escape soon, and when it did, the full force of the cruiser's security would bear down on them. For now, they had a chance. And Marcus Kane never wasted chances. "We're not done," he said, his tone sharp. "This is just the beginning." With that, they moved deeper into the ship, shadows against the metallic glow of the Empire's might. The storm Marcus had promised was finally unfolding. The control room's chaos was a microcosm of what Marcus Kane had unleashed aboard the Empire's cruiser. Blaring alarms ricocheted off the metallic walls, mingling with the panicked shouts of guards scrambling to restore order. Red emergency lights bathed the corridors in an ominous glow, casting flickering shadows as Marcus and his allies pressed forward. "Where to now?" Varek rumbled, his cybernetic arm raised defensively as another squad of guards rounded a corner. The brute dispatched one with a single swing, while Marcus's stolen blaster felled the rest in precise, calculated shots. "The command deck," Marcus replied without hesitation, his voice low but sharp. We take control of the ship." Tress, trailing behind them, cursed under his breath as he worked furiously on a portable console. His wiry fingers danced over the screen, bypassing security protocols to lock blast doors behind them. "You might want to pick up the pace. This lockdown is only slowing them down, not stopping them." "I don't need forever," Marcus said coldly, his gaze fixed ahead. "Just enough time to finish this." As they climbed the final staircase to the command deck, Marcus's mind churned. This wasn't just about escape anymore. The Empire had captured him believing he was a mere deserter, a nameless human they could toss aside. Now they would see the truth, an unmistakable, bloody reminder that even their mightiest ships were not untouchable. The blast doors to the command deck hissed open, revealing a circular chamber bristling with control panels and holo displays. Imperial officers snapped their heads toward the intruders, their surprise quickly morphing into alarm. "Stop them!" barked a tall figure in a crisp uniform, clearly the commanding officer. Guards surged forward, weapons raised, but Marcus was already moving. Varek charged first, a battering ram of muscle and machinery that slammed into the nearest cluster of soldiers, scattering them like ragdolls. Marcus followed, his movements a deadly blur. Each shot from his blaster found its mark, precise and unrelenting. Tress hung back, his console plugged into the room's primary control terminal. "Give me a minute to override navigation," he called out, his voice taut with concentration. "You've got 30 seconds, Marcus snapped, pivoting to fire at a guard trying to flank them. The room descended into chaos, but Marcus thrived in it. Every step, every action was deliberate, a symphony of destruction orchestrated by years of training and experience. The commanding officer drew his own weapon, firing wildly, but Marcus was faster. With a fluid motion, he disarmed the man and pinned him against the nearest console. The officer's eyes widened in terror. "Who are you?" he gasped. Marcus leaned in, his voice a low growl. "You don't get to know that. But you'll remember me." With a sharp strike, the officer crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Marcus turned to Tress, who raised a hand triumphantly. "Got it. Navigation's ours, and I've disabled their external communications." "Good," Marcus said, his tone devoid of triumph. "Let's finish this." He moved to the main console, scanning the ship systems with practiced efficiency. One command stood out: the option to disable the ship's primary reactor. A controlled overload would cripple the cruiser, leaving it dead in space. "Are you serious?" Tress asked, his voice rising in alarm as he noticed Marcus's intentions. "We're on this ship. We won't be for long," Marcus replied coolly. "There's an escape pod bay 3 decks down. We'll reach it before the reactor blows." Varric nodded, his massive frame looming behind them. "Do it. Let the Empire choke on its arrogance." With a final keystroke, Marcus initiated the reactor's overload sequence. Warning klaxons screamed throughout the ship, and red lights turned an ominous purple. "This ship will be debris in 15 minutes, Marcus said, his voice calm amidst the chaos. "Move." The trio sprinted from the command deck, weaving through panicked officers and guards who were too consumed by the reactor's impending meltdown to stop them. Marcus's focus never wavered, his mind locked on their escape route. The escape pod bay was a flurry of activity as lower-ranking crew members scrambled for survival. Marcus and his team dispatched the few who tried to block their path, sealing themselves inside one of the pods. Tress frantically activated the launch sequence. "I hope your timing's as good as your shooting," he muttered. "It always is," Marcus replied, strapping himself in. The pod ejected from the ship with a deafening hiss, rocketing into the void just as the cruiser's reactor reached critical mass. Behind them, the massive vessel shuddered, its sleek frame splitting as explosions tore through its core. A brilliant flash illuminated the darkness as the Empire's pride was reduced to smoldering wreckage. Inside the pod, silence reigned. Tress stared at Marcus, his expression a mix of awe and fear. "You really are a ghost, aren't you?" Marcus didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the drifting debris outside, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Not a ghost," he finally said. "Just a man they'll never forget." The pod's thrusters hummed, carrying them into the infinite expanse of stars. The Empire had underestimated him, but Marcus Kane wasn't done. This was just the beginning of the reckoning.